The barrel of Samuel Blackwood's Colt revolver pressed cold against Margaret Wilson's temple, her pulse hammering beneath the steel. Sweat and blood mingled on her back, where the morning's whipping had left raw crimson trails across her pale skin. "Give me one reason why I shouldn't blow your pretty head off right now." Blackwood hissed his liquor-soured breath hot against her face. "Found you stealing papers from the boss's office. That's a hanging offense." Margaret's fingers tightened around the document she'd risked everything to obtain proof of Clayton Reeves's land fraud evidence that could expose the cattle baron's theft of Comanche territory. She'd endured 6 months of brutal captivity at Blackthorn Ranch for this moment. Death now would mean it was all for nothing. "Undo it, and you'll never find the other documents I've hidden," she whispered, the lie slipping easily from her lips. "Reeves will lose everything when they surface." A flicker of uncertainty crossed Blackwood's scarred face. This educated Boston woman had proven more troublesome than anyone expected. He lowered the gun slightly. "Lock her in the storage shed." He barked at his men. "No food, no water. By morning she'll be begging to tell us where they are." As rough hands dragged her across the yard, Margaret caught a glimpse of movement at the edge of the property, a shadow among shadows watching with patient intensity. For the briefest moment, dark eyes locked with hers, and an impossible hope bloomed in her chest. She hadn't imagined it. Someone was out there. Someone was watching. That night, as Margaret shivered in the stifling darkness of the storage shed, her wrists raw from the ropes binding them, she heard the first gunshot. Then another. Shouts erupted across the ranch, followed by the orange glow of flames. The diversion she'd been praying for had arrived. The door splintered inward. A tall figure silhouetted against the night, tomahawk in hand. In one fluid motion, the warrior severed her bindings. Up close, his face was a stern map of purpose and pride painted with red and black streaks for battle. "Can you run?" he asked, his English accented but clear. "Yes," she answered, already on her feet, despite the pain lancing through her body. "Then run," he commanded, turning to face the approaching ranch hands. "Or die here." It was no choice at all. Margaret ran. Red Hawk had been observing Blackthorn Ranch for 3 days before he saw her a white woman with fire in her eyes, despite the bruises on her face. She moved differently from the broken slaves that populated the ranch, watching everything, her intelligence evident, even from a distance. He hadn't expected to find an ally among the white settlers, certainly not a woman. Yet when their eyes met across the dusty yard, something passed between them. Recognition of a shared enemy. His raid had been planned as a simple mission: harass the ranch, reclaim supplies stolen from Comanche. Hunting parties remind the cattle baron that his stolen land came with a price. Taking the woman had never been part of his intention. But neither had he anticipated her knowledge or her courage. Now they raced across the moonlit Texas plains, the sound of pursuit growing distant behind them. The woman Margaret, she'd told him, clung to his back as his horse carried them deeper into territory few white eyes had seen. Red Hawk felt her trembling from cold or fear or both, yet she made no sound of complaint. "They will follow," he told her as they paused to water the horse at a hidden spring. "Reeves doesn't forgive those who defy him." "I know," she replied, the document still clutched in her hand. "These are worth more than my life to him. They prove he's been forging land deeds, selling Comanche territory he has no right to claim." Red Hawk's eyes narrowed. "How does a white woman come to care about Comanche lands?" Margaret met his gaze steadily. "I care about justice, and I've seen enough injustice at Blackthorn Ranch to last several lifetimes." She shivered in the pre-dawn chill. "I responded to advertisements promising good wages for educated women in the West. Instead, I found myself enslaved. My papers seized, treated no better than cattle. And these documents—" Red Hawk gestured to the papers she held. "I listened, watched, learned. Reeves thought me simple because I'm a woman. He spoke freely around me. A bitter smile touched her lips. His mistake. Red Hawk studied her for a long moment. My people are camped 3 hours' ride from here. You will not be welcomed by all. But you will be safer there than anywhere Reeves can reach. Margaret nodded, decision already made. Lead on. The Comanche camp was smaller than Margaret had imagined, a collection of perhaps 20 teepees arranged in a circle around a central fire. Women paused in their morning tasks to stare as Red Hawk rode in with a white woman clinging to his back. Children pointed, warriors gripped their weapons tighter. Red Hawk dismounted in one fluid motion, then helped Margaret down. Her legs nearly buckled, exhaustion and pain threatening to overwhelm her now that the immediate danger had passed. Only pride kept her standing as a circle of curious and hostile faces formed around them. The crowd parted for an elderly man leaning on an ornately carved walking stick. His face was a map of deep wrinkles, his eyes sharp beneath heavy brows. The tribal elder Margaret guessed, noting how even Red Hawk inclined his head respectfully. "My grandson brings a white woman to our camp," the old man said in surprisingly good English. "This is unusual." "Dark Feather," Red Hawk addressed him formally. "This woman has information about the land thief Reeves. She has stolen documents that prove his crimes." Dark Feather's penetrating gaze seemed to look through Margaret rather than at her. "Why should we trust the word of a white woman? Your people have brought nothing but lies and disease to ours." Margaret straightened despite her pain. "I am not asking for your trust, only your temporary shelter. I was Reeves's prisoner. I have seen his cruelty firsthand." She held out the documents. "These prove he has been stealing your land through forged deeds. In a week he plans to auction off more of your hunting grounds. With these I can stop him." The elder took the papers, examining them, though Margaret doubted he could read the English text. His expression revealed nothing. "She will stay," he finally pronounced. "Red Hawk, you brought her. You are responsible for her." Without another word, he turned and walked away, taking the documents with him. A woman approached her face, neither friendly nor hostile, merely practical. She gestured for Margaret to follow her to a small teepee at the edge of the camp. "You will sleep here," Red Hawk explained. "Rest, heal. When you are stronger, we will decide what to do about Reeves and his land theft." Left alone, Margaret sank onto a bed of soft furs, her body finally surrendering to exhaustion. For the first time in 6 months, she slept without fear. 3 days passed before Margaret was strong enough to fully participate in camp life. The Comanche women treated her wounds with herbal poultices that stung fiercely, but brought remarkable healing. Food, while unfamiliar, was plentiful, and gradually her strength returned. Most watched her with wary curiosity, a few with open hostility. Only Red Hawk and, surprisingly, his grandfather Dark Feather engaged with her directly. On the 4th day, Red Hawk sought her out as she sat by the small fire outside her teepee. "The documents you took," he began without preamble. "My grandfather believes they could stop Reeves, but only if placed in the right hands. The territorial judge arrives in Blackwater Creek tomorrow. He is said to be an honest man. Judge Wilson." Margaret nodded. "I heard Reeves mention him. He's worried about Wilson's appointment, says he can't be bought. Then these papers must reach him before the auction." Red Hawk's expression was grave. "But Reeves will be watching the roads to town. Anyone carrying these documents would be in great danger." Margaret met his gaze steadily. "I'll go. I'm the only one who can testify to how these documents were obtained, how Reeves operates." "It's too dangerous," Red Hawk countered. "Reeves would kill you on sight." "Then I won't be seen." Margaret leaned forward. "But I need something else, first proof that can't be disputed. The originals of these documents are in Reeves' office, in a safe behind his desk." Red Hawk's eyes widened slightly. "You want to return to Blackthorn Ranch after escaping?" It's the last place they'd expect me to go. A grim smile touched her lips. Besides, I know that ranch better than anyone. 6 months of captivity taught me every shadow, every patrol routine. Red Hawk studied her for a long moment, reassessing this woman who had seemed so fragile when he first brought her to camp. "You have the heart of a warrior," he said finally. "But you will not go alone. I will accompany you." That evening, they presented their plan to the tribal council. Margaret watched Red Hawk speak his words in Comanche, flowing too rapidly for her to follow, but his passion evident in every gesture. When he finished, Dark Feather turned to her. "My grandson says you wish to return to the place of your captivity," the elder said. "Why risk your freedom when you have just gained it?" "Because freedom means nothing if others remain enslaved," Margaret replied. "Reeves holds more than 20 people against their will at Blackthorn Ranch, and he will continue stealing your lands unless he is stopped." She paused. "This isn't just your fight or my fight. It's about justice for all." Dark Feather nodded slowly. "There is wisdom in your words." He spoke briefly in Comanche to the council, then turned back to Margaret. "We will help you. Red Hawk will choose 2 warriors to accompany you. May the spirits guide your path." As the council dispersed, a tall warrior approached Red Hawk, speaking in rapid Comanche, while casting suspicious glances at Margaret. Though she couldn't understand the words, the hostility was unmistakable. "That's White Wolf," Red Hawk explained later, as they sat by the fire planning their approach to the ranch. "My cousin. He doesn't trust you. Says no white woman would risk her life for Comanche land." "He's right to be suspicious," Margaret admitted. "In his position, I would feel the same." She stared into the flames. But sometimes the unlikeliest allies are the strongest. Red Hawk nodded, a rare half-smile touching his lips. "Like a Boston school teacher and a Comanche warrior." "Precisely," Margaret replied, returning his smile. In the flickering firelight, she realized something had changed between them, a subtle shift from wary allies to something approaching friendship. The thought both comforted and unsettled her as they turned back to planning their dangerous mission. They left before dawn, 4 riders moving silently through the Texas landscape, Margaret, Red Hawk, White Wolf, and a younger warrior named Running Deer. The plan was simple, but dangerous approach. Blackthorn Ranch under cover of darkness, enter through the rarely used western entrance, retrieve the documents from Reeves's office, and escape before their presence was detected. As they rode, White Wolf maneuvered his horse alongside Margaret's, his dark eyes studying her with unconcealed distrust. "You lived among these men," he said abruptly, his English heavily accented. "Why should we believe you won't betray us when we reach the ranch?" Margaret met his gaze unflinchingly. "Because Reeves destroyed my life. Because I bear the scars of his whip on my back. Because I've seen what happens to those who cross him." "Oh, pretty words," White Wolf sneered. "White tongues are skilled at lies." "Not lies," Margaret replied calmly. "Promises. Judge me by my actions tonight, not by the color of my skin." The warrior held her gaze for a long moment before nudging his horse ahead, clearly unconvinced. Red Hawk moved to take his place. "Ignore my cousin," he advised. "His father was killed by white soldiers. His hatred runs deep." "You don't share it?" Margaret asked, genuinely curious. A complex expression crossed Red Hawk's face. "I judge each person by their deeds, not by their people. It is uncommon among both Comanche and whites." They reached the outskirts of Blackthorn Ranch as dusk settled over the land. Concealed in a grove of cottonwoods, they observed the ranch's activities. Margaret pointed out the guards' positions and the timing of their patrols, the location of Reeves's office in the main house. "The safe is behind that painting," she explained, indicating a window on the west side. The combination is his wife's birthday, April 15th, 1840. Red Hawk raised an eyebrow. How do you know this? I cleaned his office daily. Watched him open it a dozen times, thinking I was too simple to understand what I was seeing. A grim smile touched her lips. As I said his mistake. As night deepened, they moved closer, leaving their horses concealed in a dry creek bed. The western approach was less guarded, overshadowed by rocky terrain considered too difficult for escape or attack. Moving with practiced stealth, Red Hawk led them through shadows toward the main house. A moment of tension came when a guard approached unexpectedly, forcing them to press into the darkness beneath the bunkhouse porch. The man stopped barely 3 feet from their position, lighting a cigarette. Margaret held her breath, feeling Red Hawk's body tense beside her, his hand moving to his knife. But the guard moved on, oblivious to their presence. They reached the main house without further incident. A single lamp burned in Reeves's office. He was still awake. This complicated matters. "We wait," Red Hawk whispered. For nearly an hour they huddled in the shadows, watching as the lamp finally extinguished. They waited another 20 minutes to ensure Reeves had retired to his bedroom before approaching the window. Red Hawk made quick work of the latch with his knife, and they slipped inside. The office was much as Margaret remembered, ornate desk, dominating the room, bookshelves filled with volumes Reeves never read, hunting trophies mounted on every wall. She moved directly to the landscape painting behind the desk, removing it to reveal the wall safe. 15 right, 40 left, 1840 right. She murmured, rotating the dial with practiced precision. The safe clicked open. Inside lay stacks of documents neatly labeled and organized. Margaret quickly identified what they needed: land deed survey maps, correspondence with corrupt officials. She handed them to Red Hawk, who tucked them into a pouch at his waist. "Wait," she whispered, noticing a leather-bound ledger at the back of the safe. She pulled it out, opening to reveal meticulous records of payments, bribes to officials, bounties for Comanche scalps, transactions listing human beings as property. This, too. It documents everything. A floorboard creaked outside the office. They froze, eyes locked on the door handle as it slowly began to turn. Red Hawk motioned Margaret behind the desk, while he and White Wolf pressed themselves against the wall, flanking the door, weapons ready. The door swung open. A sleepy-eyed ranch hand peered in, lantern held high. "Mr. Reeves, thought I heard—" He never finished the sentence. White Wolf struck with lightning speed, a decisive blow rendering the man unconscious before he could raise the alarm. But the lantern shattered as it hit the floor, oil splashing across the carpet, flames leaping instantly to life. "Out now." Red Hawk ordered, already moving toward the window. Margaret grabbed the ledger and followed White Wolf and Running Deer close behind. They had barely cleared the building when shouts erupted. Fire in a ranch house brought immediate response. "Split up," Red Hawk commanded as men poured from the bunkhouse. Running Deer, White Wolf, create a diversion at the stables. Margaret and I will secure the documents. White Wolf's eyes narrowed. "You trust her alone with the evidence?" "I do," Red Hawk replied firmly. "Go." As the other warriors raced toward the stables, Red Hawk led Margaret toward the creek bed where they'd left the horses. Behind them, more shouts erupted as the diversion took effect, the unmistakable sound of panicked horses being released from the stables. They had nearly reached their mounts when a rifle shot cracked through the night, the bullet splintering bark inches from Margaret's head. Spinning around, she saw Samuel Blackwood silhouetted against the burning house, reloading for another shot. "Run." Red Hawk pushed her forward as he turned, bow already drawn. His arrow found its mark, striking Blackwood's shoulder. The overseer staggered but didn't fall, raising his rifle again before another arrow forced him back into cover. They reached the horses as more shots rang out behind them. Mounting quickly, they galloped into the darkness, the chaos of the burning ranch house fading behind them. Only when they'd put several miles between themselves and Blackthorn Ranch did Red Hawk signal a halt, listening intently for signs of pursuit. "The others?" Margaret asked, breathless from the hard ride. They will meet us at the rendezvous point if they can. Red Hawk's expression was grim. If not, they know to return to the camp. An hour later, they reached the designated meeting place, a secluded box canyon accessible only through a narrow entrance easily defended. To Margaret's relief, Running Deer was already there, though blood stained his left arm where a bullet had grazed him. But White Wolf was nowhere to be seen. He was right behind me. Running Deer explained, wincing as Margaret examined his wound. We freed the horses, set fire to the hay storage. The confusion was complete. But as we escaped, White Wolf turned back. Said he saw something important. Red Hawk's face hardened. Foolish, we must wait for him. They made a cold camp, not risking a fire that might reveal their position. As the night deepened with no sign of White Wolf, tension grew. Margaret caught Red Hawk staring toward the canyon entrance, his usual stoic expression betraying concern. He is skilled, she offered. Perhaps he's just being cautious, taking a different route. Red Hawk nodded, though his eyes remained troubled. White Wolf is the best tracker in our band. If anyone can evade pursuit, it's him. Dawn broke with still no sign of the missing warrior. They couldn't wait longer. The documents had to reach Judge Wilson before the auction scheduled for noon. With reluctance, Red Hawk decided they must continue to Blackwater Creek without White Wolf. As they prepared to depart, a distant sound caught their attention, hoofbeats approaching fast. Red Hawk signaled for silence, bow ready, as they took defensive positions. The riders appeared at the canyon entrance, White Wolf alive, but clearly injured, blood soaking his right side. Behind him rode a second figure, a white man Margaret had never seen before. He brings a stranger to our hiding place. Running Deer hissed, raising his bow. Wait, Margaret cautioned, noting that White Wolf seemed to be guiding the man rather than being pursued by him. White Wolf dismounted painfully, supporting himself against his horse. This man, he gasped, gesturing to the stranger. Found him imprisoned at the ranch. Says he's the territorial surveyor. Says Reeves kidnapped him to prevent him reporting the true boundaries. The stranger, a thin man with intelligent eyes, nodded emphatically. Thomas Ainsworth, territorial surveyor. Been Reeves's unwilling guest for 3 weeks now. He glanced at Margaret, recognition dawning. You're the woman they were talking about. The one who escaped. Margaret Wilson, she confirmed. How did you end up at Blackthorn Ranch? Sent to verify property lines after complaints about Reeves expanding his fences, Ainsworth explained. Found evidence of massive encroachment on both settler and native lands. Next thing I know, I'm looking down the barrel of Blackwood's revolver. He patted a leather case slung across his body. Got all my original surveys right here. Official government documentation that proves exactly which lands belong to whom. Red Hawk and Margaret exchanged significant looks. With the surveyor's official records and the documents from Reeves's safe, they had irrefutable evidence of the cattle baron's crimes. We ride for Blackwater Creek, Red Hawk decided. Now, as they approached Blackwater Creek, Margaret felt a growing sense of unease. The small frontier town seemed unusually busy for early morning, and the main street crowded with horses and men. Many wore the silver stars of various law enforcement agencies. Something's wrong, she murmured to Red Hawk as they observed from a ridge overlooking the town. Those aren't just locals. There are marshals, rangers, too many armed men. Ainsworth squinted at the gathering. That's Governor Sinclair's personal security detail. See those men with the black hats? What's the governor doing in a backwater like Blackwater Creek? A chill ran down Margaret's spine. The auction? Reeves bragged about having the governor's support. Said Sinclair was invested in his land development schemes. Red Hawk's expression darkened. If your governor supports Reeves, can we trust your judge? Judge Wilson has a reputation for integrity, Ainsworth offered. But if the governor himself is here, he left the implication hanging. Margaret made a quick decision. I'll go into town alone. I'll attract less attention than a group including wounded Comanche warriors. Too dangerous. Red Hawk objected immediately. If Reeves or Blackwood, they're back at the ranch dealing with the fire, she countered. Besides, I can blend in. Clean clothes, my hair properly arranged, I'll look like any settler woman come to town for supplies. After fierce debate, they agreed to her plan. Ainsworth provided his spare shirt to replace her blood-stained one, while White Wolf reluctantly offered a hunting knife she could conceal in her boot. Red Hawk remained opposed until the last moment. If you're not back by noon, we come for you. He stated, his tone allowing no argument. Be careful, Margaret Wilson. You carry more than documents with you. The intensity in his dark eyes stirred something in her chest she wasn't prepared to examine. She nodded once before turning her horse toward town and the precious documents and ledgers secured inside her clothing. Blackwater Creek's main street was indeed unusually crowded. Margaret kept her head down, moving purposefully toward the courthouse where Judge Wilson would be holding session. She was nearly there when a voice called out, stopping her cold. Well, now, if it isn't the Boston schoolteacher. Margaret turned slowly to face Clayton Reeves himself, immaculately dressed, despite the early hour, not a hint of ash or smoke from the ranch fire marring his expensive suit. His smile didn't reach his cold eyes. Mr. Reeves, she acknowledged, fighting to keep her voice steady. Surprising to see you in town so early. Not nearly as surprising as seeing you alive, Miss Wilson. His voice was pleasant, conversational, but his hand rested casually on his holstered revolver. Especially after the unfortunate fire at my ranch last night. A fire I believe you and your savage friends were responsible for. Margaret's mind raced. How had he beaten them to town? He should have been occupied with the chaos at the ranch, yet here he stood completely composed as if expecting her arrival. I don't know what you're talking about, she replied, aware of curious onlookers beginning to gather. I've been traveling north these past days seeking employment. A touching tale. Reeves stepped closer. Almost as touching as the one your Comanche friend White Wolf told us after we captured him. Amazing how cooperative even the proudest savage becomes with the right persuasion. Margaret's blood turned to ice. White Wolf captured, but they just parted ways with him on the ridge. Unless the realization hit her with stunning force. The rescue of Ainsworth, the convenient arrival with crucial evidence. White Wolf's sudden willingness to trust a white man, it had all been too perfect. You've been watching us, she whispered, all along. Did you really think a few savages could outwit me in my own territory? Reeves chuckled, the sound devoid of humor. White Wolf was quite cooperative once Blackwood explained the alternatives. Followed you from the Comanche camp, reported your every move. His smile widened. Including your plan to meet Judge Wilson. Margaret took an involuntary step backward, bumping into someone behind her. Turning slightly, she found herself surrounded by Reeves's men, their expressions leaving no doubt about her situation. The documents. Reeves continued, holding out his hand. All of them. Now. Unless you'd prefer to watch your Comanche friends die one by one when they come looking for you. With a sinking heart, Margaret realized she had walked into a perfectly executed trap. Red Hawk and the others would ride into an ambush if they came for her. And Judge Wilson, was he even still alive? Or had Reeves eliminated that threat as well? The judge is expecting me, she said, stalling for time. People have seen me in town. You can't simply make me disappear. My dear Miss Wilson. Reeves replied with mock sympathy. You're an escaped prisoner, a thief and a conspirator with hostile Indians. No one will question your arrest or whatever unfortunate accident might befall you in custody. As Reeves's men closed in, Margaret's hand moved to her boot fingers wrapping around White Wolf's knife. If she was to die, She would not go meekly. But before she could act, a commotion erupted at the end of the street. Horses approached at a gallop. Not Comanche warriors, but uniformed soldiers, a dozen at least, led by an officer whose bearing commanded immediate respect. Behind them rode a figure Margaret recognized with surprise and relief, Thomas Ainsworth, the real Thomas Ainsworth. Reeves's composure finally cracked as the soldiers surrounded them, rifles ready. Clayton Reeves. The officer announced, his voice carrying across the now silent street. By order of Judge Wilson and the Territorial Court, you are under arrest for fraud, kidnapping, and conspiracy against the United States government. This is absurd, Reeves sputtered, looking toward the gathering crowd for support. I am a respected businessman with friends in the highest. Your friends can't help you now. The officer cut him off, nodding to his men who moved forward to take Reeves into custody, including Governor Sinclair, who is currently answering some very uncomfortable questions from federal investigators. As the soldiers secured Reeves and his men, Ainsworth approached Margaret. Thomas Ainsworth. He introduced himself properly. The real one, not whatever imposter Reeves sent to trap you. Captain Reynolds found me on the road to town, said a Comanche warrior had informed him I was being held against my will. Margaret's confusion must have shown on her face, because Ainsworth continued. Big fellow called himself Red Hawk, said you'd be walking into a trap and needed immediate assistance. Relief washed over her. Red Hawk had suspected the deception had somehow seen through the plot when she hadn't. He'd sent Running Deer to alert the authorities while creating the illusion they were all still on the ridge planning her entry into town. The officer, Captain Reynolds, approached, removing his hat respectfully. Miss Wilson, Judge Wilson, is expecting you at the courthouse. I believe you have evidence that will be of great interest to him. Margaret nodded, her fingers finding the document still safely hidden against her skin. Yes, I do. As they escorted her toward the courthouse, Margaret glanced toward the ridge overlooking the town. Though she could see no one she knew, Red Hawk was watching. A smile touched her lips as she straightened her shoulders and walked forward to complete their mission. The Territorial Courthouse was packed to capacity as Judge Wilson called the emergency session to order. Margaret had barely had time to compose herself before being ushered into the witness chair of the documents and ledger now spread across the judge's bench, where he examined them with increasing gravity. Clayton Reeves sat in chains, his usual arrogance diminished, but not extinguished. Beside him sat the false Ainsworth revealed to be Reeves's lawyer, James Harrington, a man with his own record of shady dealings. Samuel Blackwood remained conspicuously absent still at the ranch, presumably unaware of his employer's arrest. When Margaret finished recounting her experience at Blackthorn Ranch, the enslavement, the abuse, the land fraud she had witnessed, a murmur ran through the courtroom. Even in the rough frontier where violence was commonplace, the systematic cruelty she described shocked many. Judge Wilson, a stern-faced man with penetrating eyes, studied the documents before him. These land deeds, he observed, are masterful forgeries. Had you not brought them to my attention, Miss Wilson, they likely would have passed legal scrutiny. The ledger contains the most damning evidence, Margaret pointed out. It details payments to officials, including... She hesitated, glancing toward the back of the courtroom, where armed guards still flanked the entrance. Including Governor Sinclair. The judge finished for her, holding up a page from the ledger. Yes, I see that. The governor's involvement will be addressed by federal authorities. He turned his attention to the surveyor. Mr. Ainsworth, your official surveys contradict nearly every boundary in Mr. Reeves's documents. Is that correct? Yes, Your Honor, Ainsworth confirmed. His ranch has expanded by nearly 30,000 acres in the past 3 years, alone all of it illegally seized from either Comanche hunting grounds or legitimate settler claims. Reeves surged to his feet despite his chains. This is a farce. My business dealings are perfectly legal. This woman is a disgruntled employee spreading lies, and these so-called documents are forgeries planted by hostiles. Sit down, Mr. Reeves, Judge Wilson ordered sharply. You'll have your chance to speak when the court calls for it. He shuffled through more papers. I have affidavits here from 3 former employees of Blackthorn Ranch corroborating Miss Wilson's testimony. All claim to have been held against their will, forced to work without pay, subjected to physical punishment. The door at the rear of the courtroom opened, admitting a tall figure in military uniform, a colonel judging by his insignia, accompanied by 2 armed guards. He approached the bench, handing the judge a sealed document. Judge Wilson read it quickly, his eyebrows rising. I see. Thank you, Colonel. He addressed the courtroom again. It seems federal authorities have been investigating Mr. Reeves for some time. This document confirms that Governor Sinclair has been taken into federal custody pending investigation of corruption charges. A shock ran through the assembled crowd. The governor arrested such a thing was unprecedented. Your Honor. Reeves tried again, desperation now evident in his voice. I demand representation from my legal counsel in Santa Fe. This proceeding is irregular, and what's irregular, Mr. Reeves, is the mountain of evidence suggesting you've been operating what amounts to a slave labor camp while systematically defrauding both the U.S. government and the Comanche Nation. Judge Wilson's tone left no room for argument. This court remands you to custody pending a full trial. Bailiffs removed the prisoner. As Reeves was led away, still protesting his innocence and demanding legal representation, the judge turned his attention back to Margaret. Miss Wilson, this court owes you a debt of gratitude. Your courage in bringing this evidence forward has likely saved many lives. It wasn't just me, Your Honor, Margaret replied. Without the Comanche, particularly Red Hawk, I would never have escaped, let alone obtained the documents. Judge Wilson nodded thoughtfully. Yes, I've heard about this Red Hawk from Captain Reynolds. Unusual for a Comanche to assist territorial authorities, even more unusual to risk himself for a white woman. He studied her with shrewd eyes. I'd like to thank him personally, if that could be arranged. Before Margaret could respond, a commotion erupted outside the courthouse, shouts, a gunshot, the sound of horses at full gallop. Captain Reynolds burst through the doors, his uniform torn, blood streaming from a gash on his forehead. The ranch, he gasped. Blackwood got word of Reeves's arrest. He's executing the workers, burning everything. Says if Reeves is going down, he's not leaving witnesses. Margaret felt the blood drain from her face. The workers, over 20 men and women, still enslaved at Blackthorn Ranch. People she'd lived alongside for 6 months who had no means of escape or defense. Judge Wilson was already on his feet shouting orders. Captain, gather your men. Colonel, I need your troops as well. This court is adjourned until... There's more, Reynolds interrupted grimly. We've had reports of Comanche warriors heading toward the ranch. A large war party. If they reach Blackthorn before we do. The implication hung in the air. A massacre either of the defenseless workers by Blackwood or of the Comanche by the ranch hands if they were prepared for the attack. Either way, blood would flow. Margaret pushed forward. I'm coming with you. She stated, her tone brooking no argument. I know the ranch know where the workers are kept, and the Comanche will listen to me. The captain looked to Judge Wilson, who hesitated only briefly before nodding. Get her a horse. We ride in 10 minutes. As they prepared to depart, Margaret found herself wondering if Red Hawk was leading the war party. Had he heard about Blackwood's rampage? Was he even now riding into danger, believing she was still safely in town? The thought spurred her to greater urgency as she mounted the horse provided by Reynolds' men, determination hardening within her. Blackthorn Ranch had been her prison for 6 months. Now it might become a battlefield. And she was riding straight back into the heart of it. They spotted the smoke from 5 miles away. Thick, black columns rising into the clear Texas sky. As they drew closer, the sound of gunfire became audible, sporadic at first, then more concentrated. The soldiers urged their mounts to a gallop, Margaret keeping pace despite her exhaustion. Cresting the final rise overlooking Blackthorn Ranch, Margaret gasped at the scene below. The main house was engulfed in flames, black smoke billowing skyward. The bunkhouse and several outbuildings were burning as well, but it was the chaotic battle unfolding across the ranch yard that froze her blood. Comanche warriors, at least 20, engaged in fierce combat with Blackwood's men. Gunfire crackled from defensive positions, while mounted warriors circled loosing arrows with deadly precision. Bodies lay scattered across the hard-packed earth, some moving, others ominously still. "My God," Captain Reynolds breathed beside her. "It's a massacre." Margaret scanned the battlefield, desperately seeking one particular figure. There, at the center of the chaos, Red Hawk fought with focused intensity, directing the warriors while engaged in combat himself. Even at this distance, she recognized his powerful build, the distinctive eagle feather in his hair. "Oh, Captain, we need to stop this," she urged. "The workers, they're being kept in the storage sheds behind the stable. If those catch fire..." Reynolds nodded grimly, signaling his men to spread out. "We'll approach from the east. Try to secure the workers first. Stay behind me, Miss Wilson. That's an order." But as the soldiers began their descent, a new development caught Margaret's attention. A small group of figures emerged from the burning main house, Samuel Blackwood at their center, using terrified workers as human shields. Even from this distance, Margaret could see the gleam of a knife at a woman's throat. Behind them, more workers were being herded at gunpoint by Blackwood's remaining men. "Wait." Margaret grabbed Reynolds' arm. "Blackwood has hostages. If you charge in now, he'll kill them." The captain hesitated, reassessing the situation. "We need to draw his attention, create an opening for those people to escape. I can help with that." Margaret slid from her horse. "Blackwood wants me dead almost as much as he wants to save his own skin. Let me draw his focus while your men circle around." "Absolutely not," Reynolds objected. "That's suicide. It's our best chance." Margaret's voice was steady despite her racing heart. "Besides, I know someone who can help." Before Reynolds could stop her, Margaret had slipped away, moving laterally across the hillside rather than down toward the ranch. She needed to reach Red Hawk, coordinate their attack. If she could get to the rock outcropping to the west, she might be able to catch his attention without exposing herself to Blackwood's men. The journey down the rocky slope was treacherous, loose stones, threatening to announce her presence with every step. Twice, she nearly fell, catching herself only at the last moment. The sounds of battle grew louder, men shouting, horses screaming, the crack of gunfire echoed by the deeper thump of Comanche war drums. Margaret reached the outcropping unseen and peered around its edge. From this vantage point, she could see Blackwood more clearly. The overseer was shouting orders, using the terrified workers to shield his retreat toward the stables where horses waited. His face was contorted with desperate rage, a man who knew his empire was crumbling, but determined to exact a final price. Movement in her peripheral vision caught Margaret's attention. A Comanche warrior had separated from the main battle, circling toward her position. She tensed, ready to flee, until she recognized White Wolf. His face was bruised, dried blood caked at his temple, but his eyes were clear and focused. "A White Wolf," she whispered urgently as he approached. "I thought you were captured, Reeves told me." "Lies," the warrior spat, crouching beside her. "I followed the false surveyor, discovered his deception. When I returned to warn you, Blackwood's men ambushed me." His expression darkened. "They bound me, questioned me. I told them nothing, but they sent an imposter in my place. I escaped during the confusion when Red Hawk attacked." Relief washed over Margaret. "We need to reach Red Hawk. Blackwood has hostages and soldiers are coming from the east." White Wolf nodded, his former hostility toward her entirely gone. "I will bring him. Stay hidden." He disappeared back toward the battlefield with the silent grace of a hunting cat. Minutes later, Red Hawk materialized beside her, his face streaked with war paint and the grime of battle. A bloody gash crossed his left shoulder, but he moved with undiminished strength. Margaret. He breathed, and for a fleeting moment, relief and something deeper shone in his eyes. Then his warrior's mask returned. You escaped the town trap? Good. Blackwood burns, everything kills everyone. We try to save the workers, but... He gestured toward the standoff unfolding below. Captain Reynolds and his soldiers are approaching from the east. Margaret explained quickly. But Blackwood will kill the hostages if he's cornered. Red Hawk's gaze sharpened. You have a plan. It wasn't a question, but Margaret nodded anyway. Blackwood wants me. He blames me for all of this. If I show myself become the target he fixates on, no. Red Hawk's refusal was immediate and absolute. Too dangerous. It's the only way, Margaret insisted. I distract him, you free the hostages, the soldiers take care of the rest. Red Hawk studied her face, seeing the determination there. Something passed between them, understanding respect, and an unspoken acknowledgement of what had been growing between them since that first night of her rescue. You have become Comanche in your heart, he said finally. Brave, willing to die for others. His hand touched her cheek briefly. But I did not save you from this place, only to lose you now. Before she could respond, White Wolf rejoined them, urgency in his movements. Blackwood moves toward the creek. Soon he will be beyond our reach. Red Hawk made his decision. We do this together. Margaret draws his attention. I lead warriors to circle behind. White Wolf, signal the soldiers to be ready. His eyes locked with Margaret's. Be careful. The spirits brought you to us for a purpose. That purpose is not yet fulfilled. They separated, each moving to their appointed task. Margaret circled to position herself on a rise, where Blackwood would clearly see her, while Red Hawk and his warriors melted into the landscape, preparing to strike. The soldiers, seeing White Wolf's signal, began spreading out to encircle the remaining ranch buildings. Taking a deep breath, Margaret stepped into clear view. Blackwood. She shouted, her voice carrying across the suddenly quieter battlefield. Looking for me. The overseer's head snapped up, disbelief and rage contorting his features as he recognized her. The school teacher, he snarled, pressing his knife tighter against his hostage's throat. Come to watch your Indian friends die. It's over, Blackwood. Margaret called, forcing confidence into her voice, despite the fear coursing through her. Reeves is in custody. The governor, too. There's nowhere left to run. There's always somewhere to run in Texas. Blackwood retorted. Wide open spaces. All I need is a head start and a few less witnesses. He gestured toward the terrified workers, starting with these ungrateful wretches. Margaret took a careful step forward, drawing his focus more fully onto her. Let them go. Your quarrel is with me, none of my quarrel. Blackwood laughed, the sound harsh and unhinged. Is with anyone who threatens what's mine. Reeves built this ranch, but I made it feared. I broke men stronger than you, schoolteacher. Should have broken you properly when I had the chance. As he focused on Margaret, Red Hawk and 3 warriors silently approached from behind the stable, using the smoke as cover. Margaret needed to keep Blackwood distracted just a little longer. You never could break me, she taunted, taking another step forward. That's what really bothers you, isn't it? That a woman outsmarted you. That I saw through your petty tyranny and found the courage to fight back. Blackwood's face flushed dark with rage. Courage, I'll show you courage. He shoved his hostage aside, focusing his hatred entirely on Margaret. I'm going to finish what I started with that whip. Only this time, I won't stop until you're begging for death. He started toward her, knife in hand, exactly as she'd intended. The moment his hostages were clear, Red Hawk's warriors struck, pulling the workers to safety as soldiers converged from the east. Blackwood realized his mistake too late. Surrounded, outnumbered, he turned back to Margaret with murderous intent. "If I'm going down," he growled, "you're coming with me." He lunged forward with surprising speed for such a large man. Margaret had anticipated this, had prepared herself, but theory was different from practice. Blackwood's knife slashed toward her midsection as she tried to sidestep, catching her sleeve and slicing into her forearm. Pain lanced through her, but adrenaline kept her moving, retreating as he advanced. "There's nowhere left to run." Blackwood taunted, circling her like a predator. "No savages to save you now." A sudden movement caught his peripheral vision too late. Red Hawk's tomahawk struck with devastating precision, catching Blackwood's knife hand at the wrist. The overseer screamed, dropping to his knees, as Red Hawk landed beside him, a second weapon already drawn. "She doesn't need saving," Red Hawk stated coldly. "But you do need justice." Before Blackwood could respond, soldiers surrounded them, rifles aimed at the overseer's chest. Captain Reynolds approached, his expression grim. "Samuel Blackwood, you're under arrest for murder, kidnapping, and about a dozen other crimes I don't have time to list." He nodded to his men. "Secure him, and get a medic for Miss Wilson." As the soldiers dragged Blackwood away, Margaret finally allowed herself to feel the pain of her wound. Red Hawk was instantly at her side, examining the cut with careful fingers. "Not deep," he assessed, tearing a strip from his own garment to bind it. "You fought well." Margaret managed a smile despite the pain. "We fought well, together." Their eyes met, and in that moment, surrounded by the chaos of the battlefield, something profound passed between them. A recognition that their paths, so improbably crossed, had become intertwined in ways neither could have imagined. The moment was broken by Judge Wilson's arrival, the older man looking distinctly out of place amidst the smoke and blood of the battlefield. He surveyed the scene with a mixture of horror and grim satisfaction. "Justice comes in many forms," he observed, "though I prefer courtrooms to battlefields." His gaze settled on Red Hawk, still kneeling beside Margaret. "You must be the Comanche warrior I've heard so much about. I owe you my thanks for your assistance in this matter." Red Hawk stood facing the judge with the dignified bearing of one leader addressing another. "I fight for my people's lands, for justice. The woman Margaret Wilson showed us that some whites also fight for these things." Judge Wilson nodded thoughtfully. "Indeed she did." He gestured toward the burning ranch buildings. "This land, much of it was stolen from your people through Reeves's fraudulent dealings. The court will need to determine its rightful ownership. The land belongs to the earth." Red Hawk replied simply. "My people lived here for many generations before papers and fences." A hint of a smile touched the judge's weathered face. A perspective the territorial court rarely considers, but perhaps should. He turned to Margaret. "Miss Wilson, once your wound is tended, I'd appreciate your assistance in identifying which workers need immediate medical attention and which of the ranch hands were willing participants in Reeves's operation." Margaret nodded, though her thoughts were already racing ahead. What would happen now? The workers would be freed. Blackwood and Reeves would face justice. But what of the land? What of the Comanche who had risked their lives to help her? What of Red Hawk? As if sensing her thoughts, Red Hawk's hand briefly touched hers. "First we heal," he said quietly. "Then we decide what comes next." The aftermath of the battle at Blackthorn Ranch unfolded over the following days with surprising speed. The territorial court, energized by Judge Wilson's determination, processed the freed workers' testimonies and arranged for their transportation to wherever they wished to go. Some chose to return east, others sought new opportunities in different frontier towns. A few, having nowhere else to go, remained in Blackwater Creek, finding work with sympathetic townspeople. Margaret spent those days assisting the judge, her knowledge of both the ranch operations and the Comanche proving invaluable. Her wound healed quickly under the care of both the Army physician and Comanche healers, who applied poultices that drew out infection and sped recovery. Red Hawk and his warriors made camp outside town, an unusual arrangement that raised eyebrows, but was sanctioned by Judge Wilson himself. Each evening, Margaret would visit their camp, sharing news of the day's developments and simply enjoying the peace she found in their company, particularly Red Hawk's. On the 5th day after the battle, Judge Wilson summoned both Margaret and Red Hawk to the courthouse. The atmosphere in his chambers was solemn as they entered, the judge standing behind his desk, with an array of documents spread before him. "Please sit." He gestured to the chairs opposite his desk. "What I have to share affects you both." Margaret and Red Hawk exchanged glances before taking their seats. The judge cleared his throat, seeming uncharacteristically hesitant. "I've received communications from the territorial governor's office, not Sinclair, of course, but his replacement appointed by the federal authorities." He picked up one of the papers. "The good news is that the fraudulent land claims made by Reeves have been invalidated. The 30,000 acres he illegally acquired will not be auctioned off." "And the bad news?" Margaret asked, sensing there was more. Judge Wilson sighed. "The territorial government is not prepared to return the lands to Comanche control. They propose designating it as federal territory open for future settlement." Red Hawk's expression remained impassive, but Margaret could see the tension in his shoulders. "So the theft continues," he said quietly. "Only now with government approval." "Not necessarily," Judge Wilson replied, shuffling through his papers. "I've been researching precedents, and while there is no direct comparison to this situation, there may be a way forward." He looked up, meeting Red Hawk's gaze directly. "What would you say to a compromise, a designated territory, where the Comanche would have protected hunting rights, even as settlement gradually occurs around its boundaries?" Red Hawk considered this carefully. "Words on paper have proven meaningless before. What would make this different?" "My personal oversight," the judge replied promptly. "I've requested permanent assignment to this district specifically to monitor implementation of the agreement. And," he glanced at Margaret, "I would suggest appointing a liaison, someone who understands both worlds, to ensure the terms are honored." Margaret felt the weight of his implication. "You mean me?" Judge Wilson nodded. "You've proven yourself in extraordinary circumstances, Miss Wilson. Your understanding of Comanche culture combined with your education makes you uniquely qualified for such a role." The proposition hung in the air between them. A path forward, not perfect, not complete justice, but perhaps the beginning of something new. A bridge between worlds. "Num, I would need to consult with my grandfather, the tribal elders," Red Hawk said finally. "This decision affects all our people, not just those who fought at the ranch." "Of course," the judge agreed. "I've drafted preliminary terms if you'd care to review them." He pushed several pages across the desk. "Take your time. This is too important to rush." As they left the courthouse, Margaret and Red Hawk walked in contemplative silence toward the edge of town, where his horse waited. The spring sunshine warmed the air, a gentle breeze carrying the scent of wildflowers from the surrounding plains. "What will you tell your grandfather?" Margaret asked finally, Red Hawk's gaze fixed on the distant horizon. "The truth, that the world is changing faster than we can fight it. That perhaps this compromise, while not justice, gives our people time to adapt, to find a new way forward without abandoning who we are." "And what of us?" The question slipped out before she could reconsider it. "If I were to become this liaison living between worlds," Red Hawk turned to her, his expression softening from the warrior's mask he showed to others. "When I found you that night, I saw only a white woman who might help my people. Now I see Margaret Wilson, who fights with the heart of a Comanche." He took her hand, his touch gentle despite the strength in his fingers. "My grandfather says the spirits guide our paths for reasons we cannot always see." Perhaps they crossed our paths for this purpose, to build something new from the ruins of the old. It wasn't a declaration of love, in the way a Boston gentleman might have delivered it. But in its simplicity, its honesty, it touched Margaret's heart more deeply than flowery words ever could. "I'd like that," she replied softly. 2 months later, Margaret stood on a hillside overlooking a valley, where 24 Comanche teepees formed a semicircle along a clear running stream. Nearby, the framework of a small wooden cabin was taking shape her new home. Positioned deliberately at the boundary between the Comanche protected territory and settler lands, Judge Wilson had been true to his word. The agreement, while imperfect, provided the Comanche with exclusive hunting rights across significant portions of their traditional lands. More importantly, it recognized them not as hostile savages to be eliminated or contained, but as a sovereign people with legitimate claims to their ancestral territory. Margaret's appointment as official liaison had raised eyebrows throughout the territory. A woman barely 25 given such responsibility was unprecedented. But Judge Wilson had silenced critics by pointing to her unique qualifications and the trust she had earned from both communities. Dark Feather approached his steps slower than they had been months earlier, but his eyes still sharp as ever. "The cabin grows quickly," he observed in his accented English. "Soon you will have one foot in each world." Margaret smiled at the elder. "I already do, grandfather." She had begun calling him this after her formal acceptance into the tribe, not as Red Hawk's wife, not yet, but as a respected ally granted the rare privilege of kinship. "Yes." The old man agreed with a hint of a smile. "Perhaps that is why the spirits guided my grandson to you that night. To show us all that bridges can be built where walls once stood." The sound of approaching horses drew their attention. Red Hawk rode at the head of a small hunting party, several deer slung across their mounts, a successful expedition. He dismounted in a fluid motion before approaching his face lighting with a smile reserved only for Margaret and his closest family. "The hunting is good today," he reported. "We will eat well tonight." "And celebrate," Dark Feather added. "Tonight we honor those who fought for our lands and those who helped secure our future." His gaze swept from Red Hawk to Margaret. "Both our warriors and our new allies." Later that evening, as the celebration unfolded around the central fire, Margaret found herself seated beside Red Hawk, watching the intricate dances that told stories of past hunts, great battles, and tribal legends. The women had dressed her in traditional Comanche garments adorned with beadwork that Rainbow Woman, her closest female friend in the tribe, had spent weeks creating. "You are quiet tonight." Red Hawk observed his shoulder warm against hers in the cooling evening air. "I'm just thinking about everything that's happened," Margaret replied. 6 months ago, I was a prisoner at Blackthorn Ranch, convinced I would die there. Now here I am, watching a Comanche celebration, helping implement a treaty that might actually protect your people's rights." "Our people," he corrected gently. "You chose this path. You fought for it. You belong here now if you wish to stay." Margaret turned to face him, fully studying the strong lines of his face, softer now in the firelight than when she had first seen him tomahawk in hand during her rescue. "I do wish to stay," she said simply. "For as long as I'm needed." Red Hawk took her hand, his expression uncharacteristically solemn. "There is something I must ask, but it is difficult in your language." He hesitated, then continued. "Among my people, a warrior who wishes to take a wife speaks first to her family, makes offerings to show his worth. You have no family here, but Dark Feather has said he stands as your grandfather now." Margaret's heart quickened as she realized what he was saying. "And what did my grandfather say?" A small smile touched Red Hawk's lips. "He said I have been slow to speak what is in my heart, that the whole tribe has seen it, except perhaps you." He squeezed her hand gently. Margaret Wilson, would you consent to become my wife? To join our paths fully to face whatever comes next together? The question was delivered without grand gestures or poetic flourishes, just the straightforward honesty she had come to cherish in him. In that moment, Margaret knew with absolute certainty that the answer had been forming in her heart since that first night of her rescue when he had cut her bonds and offered her a chance at true freedom. Yes, she replied, her voice steady despite the emotion swelling in her chest. Yes, I will. Red Hawk smiled, and then a full, unguarded smile that transformed his usually stoic features. From around his neck, he removed a pendant, a smooth stone wrapped in intricate beadwork suspended on a leather cord. This was my mother's, he explained, placing it around Margaret's neck. It carries the protection of our ancestors, the blessing of our family line. Margaret touched the pendant, feeling its weight, its significance. I will wear it with honor, she promised. As the celebration continued around them, neither felt the need for further words. They sat together, shoulders touching, watching the dancers tell their ancient stories beneath the vast Texas sky. Their story was still being written, a new chapter, in an old land, a bridge between worlds that had too long seen only reasons to remain divided. The path ahead would not be easy. Suspicion and prejudice would come from both sides. The territorial agreement would face challenges. Old hatreds would not die quietly. But tonight, in the firelight, surrounded by a community that had become her own, Margaret Wilson, once a frightened captive at Blackthorn Ranch, felt something she had never expected to find in the harsh Texas frontier hope. 5 years later, Margaret stood once again on the hillside overlooking the valley, though now the view had changed. The Comanche camp had grown, incorporating more permanent structures alongside traditional teepees, an adaptation to their more settled lifestyle. Her own cabin had expanded as well now, serving as both her home and an informal school where she taught Comanche children English and settler children the Comanche language and customs. Beside her stood Red Hawk Time, having added a few lines to his face, but none to his spirit. At her hip, their 3-year-old daughter Morning Star watched the proceedings below with curious eyes that reflected her father's deep brown coloring, but held her mother's inquisitive nature. They were awaiting the arrival of Judge Wilson now, a regular visitor to the territory he had helped establish. The judge had been instrumental in defending the agreement against numerous challenges, his reputation for absolute integrity making him a formidable advocate. His carriage appeared on the horizon, right on schedule, the aging jurist, as punctual as ever. Do you ever regret it? Red Hawk asked suddenly, his gaze still fixed on the valley below. The path you chose, the life you might have had back east. Margaret shifted Morning Star to her other hip, considering the question seriously before answering. Sometimes I wonder what might have been, she admitted. But that's not the same as regret. Regret implies I would choose differently if given the chance. She looked out over the community they had built together, Comanche families living according to their traditions while adapting to the changing world's settler families who had chosen to establish homesteads nearby, learning to respect their indigenous neighbors rather than fear them. It wasn't perfect. Tension still flared occasionally. The outside world still pressed against their borders. But it was a beginning. I wouldn't change a thing, she said, finally reaching for her husband's hand. Not the captivity at Blackthorn Ranch, not the dangers we faced, certainly not my choice to stay. All of it led me here to this life, to you and Morning Star. How could I regret that? Red Hawk's fingers tightened around hers, his rare smile warming his eyes. The spirits guided us well, he agreed. As they descended the hill to meet Judge Wilson's carriage, Margaret reflected on the journey that had brought her here. From Boston schoolteacher to ranch captive to Comanche bride, a path no one could have predicted, least of all herself. Yet somehow, against all odds, she had found not just freedom, but belonging, not just purpose, but love. The Texas frontier was still wild, still dangerous, still contested ground between competing visions of America's future. But here in this small valley, where two cultures met, not in bloodshed, but in cautious cooperation, Margaret Wilson, now Margaret Red Hawk, in all but official documents, had found her true home. Not in the world she was born to, nor entirely in the one she had adopted, but in the bridge she had helped build between them. And as her daughter chattered happily in a fluid mixture of English and Comanche, pointing excitedly at the approaching carriage, Margaret saw the future taking shape before her eyes, a future where borders might be not walls, but meeting places, where differences might be not divisions, but strengths. It was not the life she had dreamed of as a young woman in Boston. It was something far more precious, a life she had fought for, bled for, a life forged in the fires of the harshest challenges the frontier could offer. A life of her own choosing, and that she reflected as Red Hawk lifted their daughter onto his shoulders, her small hands tangling in his long black hair, was the truest freedom of all.